Okay, so today's daf yomi is Bava Kamma daf Lamed Ches, Bava Kamma 38. We're going to start on Lamed Zayin Amud Beis, around 10 lines from the bottom, and the Gemara has just cited the Mishnah, and the Mishnah has said that if you have an ox that gores the temple's ox, then under those circumstances, that if you have an ox of a Jew that gores the ox of a temple, or if the ox of a temple that gores the ox of a Jew, in both cases we're going to say that there's no payment, that it's exempt. And the reason is because the verse says you pay damages only if it's the ox of your friend, but otherwise you don't pay damages. So the ox of the temple is not considered your friend. So the Gemara says our Mishnah is the local Rabbi Shimon. Our Mishnah is not like the position of Rabbi Shimon ben Manasseh, because Rabbi Shimon ben Manasseh taught shor shel hedjot nagach shor shel hektish. If you have an ox of a regular person who gores an ox of the temple, v'shel hektish and nagach shor shel hedjot, or if an ox of the temple that gores an ox of a hedjot, we're going to say Potter. That's what the Brisa says. That's the position of our Mishnah. But Rabbi Shimon ben Manasseh says that if it's the shor shel hektish, shenagach shor shel hedjot, if it's the ox of the temple that gores the ox of a regular person, Potter, we're going to say you're exempt. V'shel hedjot shenagach shor shel hektish. But if the ox of your ox scores a temple, then bein tam bein mu'em mishalim nezek shalim. But if your ox scores a temple's ox, you pay full damages. And whereas the Mishnah says you're exempt, Rabbi Shimon ben Manasseh says you pay full damages. So the Gemara says we don't understand the position of Rabbi Shimon ben Manasseh. I mean, Micah saw Rabbi Shimon. If when it says in the verse that it needs to be your friend's ox specifically in order to be responsible, then afilu shel hedjot shenagach shel hektish lipater. Then you should be completely exempt if the your ox scores a temple's ox. And if it doesn't mean, and if when it says friend in the verse, it doesn't mean specifically your friend, then afilu hektish nami, then even if it's the ox of the temple that gores you, you should be responsible. Afilu hektish nami ki nagach tehedjo l'chayiv, it should be responsible. So the Gemara explains, v'chitemo olam kasavar re'eu dafka. And if you want to say no, when it says his friend, it means specifically his friend. But when the regular person gores the temple's ox, what's the reason why he's responsible? Because it's proved by a kal v'chomer from a regular person. Just like a regular person who gores just like a regular person who gores a regular person's ox is responsible. Well, then if it gores a temple's ox, for sure he should be responsible. But if that would be the case, Dayo avomin adin lios kenidon, we should still be limited. Why does Rabbi Shimon ben Manasseh say if a regular person gores the temple's ox is responsible for full damages? Ma'ala tam chatzi nezek, achinami tam chatzi nezek. You should really only say that you're liable for half damages. Why does Rabbi Shimon say under these circumstances you're responsible for full damages? So therefore, what's the reason why Rabbi Shimon ben Manasseh says that if a regular person's ox scores a temple's ox, you're responsible for full damages? Amar Reish Lakish, Hakol. The Reish Lakish says, really, technically speaking, Hakol Ayu B'Kol Nezek Shalim. Really, everybody should pay full damages. But Shapiro Achav Re'eu, when the verse says specifically that if you gore your friend's ox, you're responsible. Gabe Tam, that you pay half damages. Gabe Tam Re'eu Tam Masham Chatzi Nezek. It's only in those circumstances by his friend that you pay half damages. But mikal the hektish bein tam bein mu'ah misham nezek shan. But a hektish, which is not re'eu, then even if it's tam or mu'ah, it pays full damages. So the Gemara says the imkain nechtov rakla l'hai re'eu gabi mu'ah, because otherwise, then it would have written the word re'eu by mu'ah. For the fact that it says by tam, it's to specifically just exclude the tam by re'eu that he only pays half damages, but everybody else pays full damages. Then the Gemara talks about the case where if you have an ox of a Jew that gores the ox of a Canaanite, you're going to be exempt. Of course, this teaching has caused a lot of grief to the Jewish people when they're living in the lands of the nations who obviously did not really appreciate this law. So the Gemara says, I don't understand. If when it says in the verse that you're responsible for your friend, it means specifically your friend, then if that's the case, the Kanani kinagach Yisrael nami lepater. Then if a Canaanite gores a Jew, he should be exempt. But then if it doesn't mean specifically your friend, Yisrael kinagach the Kanani nechayev. Then even if a regular Jew gores a Canaanite, he should be responsible. So what's the reasoning that a Jew who gores a Canaanite is exempt, but the Canaanite who gores a Jew is responsible? So Amar Rabbi Avo, Rabbi Avo says it's based upon the verse. Amad, it's a verse from Habakkuk. It says Amad vayimoded eretz ra'ah vayater goyim. So he stood up, he measured the earth, he saw, and he released the nations. What means Ra'ah sheva mitzvah shekibu aleim b'nei Noach. He saw the 7 Noahide laws. Kivan shelo kimu, but Hashem saw that they weren't holding them. Amad v'yitir memon al Yisrael. Hashem released their money to the Jewish people. Rabbi Yochanan says a different source for it. Amar mehacha hofia mehar paran, and Hashem appeared to them. But by the way, I just want to point out, Tosfos says that it didn't release all their money to the Jewish people, but just in this specific case, in that one ox gores another, and so therefore, so it's just in this specific case, but not all across the board. Rabbi Yochanan says a different source for the fact that the ox doesn't need to gore. It says, "Ofia mehar paran." That Hashem revealed to them their money, released their money from Mount Paran. Rashi explains when they were surrounding Har Sinai, Hashem brought the Torah to all the nations, and none of them accepted it. Hofia mi Paran, Hofia memonam Yisrael. From Paran, their money was released to the Jewish people. Gemara says, Tanya nami achim. We have a price that says, Shor shal Yisrael shenagach shor shal Kanani. Let's say you have an ox of a Jew that gores an ox of a Canaanite. We're going to say you're pater, you're exempt. Shor shal Kanani shenagach shor shal Yisrael. If you have an ox of a Canaanite that gores an ox of a Jew, bein tam bein muad mesham nezik shoim. Then, if it's a tam or a muad, it pays full damages. It says, "Amavi moded eretz or avayater gayim omer afia meyar paran." Why do we need this second verse? Ma'ava omer. V'chitem ahai amad vayimoded eretz mibayel ukdramas. You might have thought that you need the first verse, like Rav Manasseh said, Rav Yosef, who said, and we'll see in a moment. So therefore, we have this second verse. Tashma afia meyar paran. Paran afia memonol Yisrael. What's the verse that that we might have thought the first verse is going to teach us, like Rav Manasseh taught, or like Rav Yosef? Rav Manasseh, Amad v'Yimoded Eretz. What is it teaching us? Mara Shav Mitzvah Shenestavu B'nei Noach V'Lokimim. He saw that they weren't keeping the 7 mitzvahs. Amad v'Higlo Samei Alad Matam. So therefore, he exiled them. Not that he released their money, but they exiled. So the Gemara says, and so therefore we need the second verse. How do we know that the words vayater is an expression of releasing? So because it says here he released the nations, and the ksiv hasam behind our arets to remove them from the land. Behind our arets, and the word mutargim with kafza bahon our ara, to jump on the land. And so therefore we're seeing that it's an expression of releasing them from the, that it means to release from one place to another, to exile them. And what's the case of Rav Yosef? How did he interpret that pasuk? Rav Yosef, he saw that they weren't keeping the mitzvahs. He allowed them to do the mitzvahs. And that's what he saw that they weren't doing the mitzvahs. So Hashem said, okay, you don't need to do these mitzvahs. Iskuri askar? You mean to say they're getting a benefit from this? They don't have to do the mitzvahs. So we see if you do a sin, you're getting a benefit from it. Mara says, no, that's not what it means. Even if they keep the mitzvahs, they're not going to get a reward for it. So that's what it means. Gemara says, is that really not the case? Even if there's a Nachri who engages in Torah, he's like a Torah scholar. He's like a Kohen Gadol, as it says, you should do the mitzvahs and live. So Kohanim Levim Yisrael Mo Nemar. It doesn't say that Kohanim Levim Yisraelim should do the mitzvahs. It says Adam, a person who does the mitzvahs, will live. This teaches us even if you're not Jewish and engaged in Torah, Hareu Kohen Gadol. By the way, you can't just stop at the beginning of this Gemara, which says that a Jew doesn't have to pay the non-Jew the money if his ox gores him. You have to keep reading. It says even if the non-Jew studies Torah, he's like the Kohen Gadol. The Gemara says, but so why do we say that they don't get any reward? So the Gemara says, okay, they're like the Kohen Gadol. They get the reward like somebody who's not commanded and does it, which is not as great as the one who's commanded and does it. One who's commanded to do the mitzvah is greater than one who's not commanded to do it. But I was even thinking like this. So you might have thought, okay, so the Jew is better because he's commanded to do the mitzvah and he does it, so he gets more reward. But it cuts the other way. That because of that, we say the one who's not commanded and does it is actually doing it more lishma. So they're even getting more reward because they're even on a higher level because they're not getting as much reward from it. So that's an even greater spiritual level. So the non-Jew who keeps the mitzvahs is even greater spiritual level than the non-Jew who studies Torah is even on a much greater spiritual level than the Jew who studies Torah. Tana Rabbanan, so the rabbis tell us a story. The kings of Rome sent two officers to the scholars of Israel, and they said, teach us your Torah. They went over the Torah and they studied it a lot. When they were leaving Amralam, they said the Roman officers said to the Jews, to the scholars, we studied your whole Torah. Your Torah is truth. Except for one thing. We don't understand why if a Jew gores a Canaanite's ox, he's exempt. But if the Canaanite gores a Jew, he has to pay full damages. If when the Torah says you're responsible for a friend, then the Canaanite shouldn't have to pay at all. Or the Jew should have to pay. It's contradictory. So the Gemara says, and this law, which we find to be inconsistent, don't worry, we're not going to tell the authorities about it. Gemara tells us another story. Rabbi Shmuel Bar Yehuda, his daughter died. So the rabbi said to Ula, this is a very, very hard story to understand. You might find it bothersome, but we'll share the story and try to understand the best we can. So the rabbi said to Ula, let's go up and comfort Rabbi Shmuel Bar Yehuda who lost his daughter. What am I going to do with these comforters of Babylon? Because they're blasphemous. Because when they go to the mourner's house, they say, they say, what could we do? What's there to do? Which implies that if there's something to do that they could undo it, they would do. Which I don't think he said. What he's saying is, which I don't agree with, says Ula, because it's God's will, you can't undo it. So therefore, what did they do? So Ula went there by himself. Amar says to them that Vayomer Hashem said to Moshe, Al Teitzaris Moab, do not oppress Moab, Al Tiskarbam, don't incite them to war. Do you think Moshe was going to do war with the Moabites? Shows without permission. Moshe did a kavachomer. He says, just like the Midianites, they only came to help Moab. Hashem said, strike down the Midianites, attack them, and strike them down. The Moabites themselves, for sure we should wage war with them. So Hashem said, no. Your plan is not like my plan. I have two pigeons to take out from the Moabites. Ruth, who's the mother of David, Vinama Amonis, who married Shlomo Melech, and she was the mother of Rechavam. And so Ula says to Shmuel Bar Yehuda, it's a Kavachomer, he says to him as follows. If for two pigeons Hashem saved these two nations of the Moabites and the Ammonites, and he didn't destroy them, so this daughter, your daughter, if she was really worthy, if she was worthy to have something good, for sure Hashem would have let her live. So the reason why Hashem is not letting her live is because she fulfilled her mission in this world. She wasn't going to have any descendant coming from her. So it seems to me very harsh, but of course I don't understand it completely, but he was just speaking truth. Sometimes, I can't imagine he actually said this, but I think that that's what he was thinking, that sometimes there's this truth that when the person leaves the world, it means that their mission here is done. Amar B'chi bar Abba Rabbi Yochanan in a Kodesh Baruch Hu mekapel star called Beria Afilu Schar Sichanan. It's interesting that this is the next piece in the Gemara, and Hashem doesn't hold back the reward from anybody, even just for speaking nicely. Because now it goes into the story of when Lot was seduced by his two daughters who thought that the world had ended. So it says in that passage, the eldest daughter, Moab, she said, the child is from my father, and she names him Moab. God says about the Moabites, don't oppress them, don't take them to war. You can't take them to war, but you can make them your servants. So, but the younger one, the Amri Ben Ami, she covered up the incest. She just said he's the son of my people. I'm going to Kodesh Baruch Hu Moshe. God says to Moshe, when you come close to the Ammonites, Al Titzuram, don't oppress them. Al Tiskarbam, don't incite them at all. Don't even make them your servants. So meaning say we have to have more respect to the Ammonites because the younger daughter was more respectful. A person should always rush to do the mitzvah because of the one night that the older one came before the younger one to have the child with her father. She thought she was doing a mitzvah. It wasn't even a mitzvah. She just thought she was doing a mitzvah. There were four. She was able to have a child 4 generations before enter the Jewish people because Oved Yishai v'Dav v'Shlomo, because she entered in with Ovad, and then who was the daughter of Ruth, who was the son of Ruth, and then came Yishai, then came David, then came Shlomo. Whereas Tzira, the younger one, had to wait till Rechavam, who married Naamah the Ammonite. So now we have a kuti. A kuti, we're not sure if they're Jewish or not. So let's say the ox of the Jew gores the ox of the kuti. We're going to say he's potter, he's exempt. But if an ox of a kuti gores the ox of a Jew, then we say tam mishayim chatzi nezek mu mishayim nezek sham. So now we have a different one. The kuti pays half damages if it's a tam, and full damages if it's a muad. Whereas Rameir says shor shal yisrael shenagach shor shal kuti. Meir says if it's an ox of a Jew that gores an ox of a kuti, he's potter. Meir says the kuti always pays full damage. Well, that's like a Canaanite. So you mean to say Meir the Savar Meir kutim geri arayusim? Means to say Meir is saying that the kutim are basically not Jews. They're like the Canaanites, and therefore they pay full damages if they damage. But the Gemara says, but this is problematic because we say kol ksama bam mirekem tahorim. All the stains of a nida women that come from Rechem are tahor, and that's assuming that they're not Jewish, and so therefore, because most of the people who live there are not Jewish, and the cloths stained with blood of a non-Jew are not tamei. Whereas Rabbi Yehuda mitamim neishem gerim v'toim. Rabbi Yehuda says that they are going to be considered to be tamei because we assume that they were converts and they just sinned and they went amongst the people of Rechem. But the Chachamim say if it comes from amongst the non-Jews, it's Tahor. But from the Jews and the Kutim, they're Tameim. Whereas Rameir Mitame, Rameir says, that's how you find in the place of the Kutim. Rameir says it's Tamei, Chama Mitarim. So Rameir says that the cloths that you find amongst the Kutim are Tamei, whereas the Chachamim say they're Tahor. So we see from here that Rabbi Meir is of the position that the Kusim are Jewish. So if that's the case, why is he saying that the Kusi whose ox scores a Jew has to pay full damages? Amar Rabbi Avos, Rabbi Meir says, no, really Rabbi Meir says that they're true converts. Well, if that's the case, why do they pay full damages? Knas tu shekanas Rabbi Meir b'memonam shelo yitamu b'hem. Rabbi Meir made a takana to penalize the Kutim as though they're not Jews because he didn't want the Jewish people to marry amongst them and to marry their daughters. The reason is even though they were complete Jews, the Chum didn't want to marry them because they became mamzerim, and we learned that in the Gemara in Kedushin. Daf ayin vav amid aleph. So most of Rabbi Zera, so Rabbi Zera challenges because it says in the Mishnah in Ksubos, these are the girls, Rahman al-Son, if they're assaulted, you have to pay the penalty. So how can we so a person who was with a mamzeres and a sina or kusis? So if he assaulted a kusis, you have to pay full damages. If you want to say Rabbi Meir penalized their money, Hakanami nikno. So we should penalize the person who assaults a kusi girl that you don't have to pay the full damages. So the Gemara says, so that they don't come mixed in. Amar Abai said, you're right. What's the reason? Generally speaking, he says that they're Jewish, but why doesn't he penalize them? Penalize the person who assaults? Why does Rabbi Meir penalize the person who assaults the Kusi woman? Today, because we don't want this person who did this tremendous sin of assaulting a woman to say, "Oh, it's a kuti, I don't have to pay." We want to penalize this person. We don't want the person who sins to benefit. So the Gemara says, "Okay, fine. At least give it to the poor people. Give it to the poor people. Why does it go to the kuti? We don't want the kuti to benefit. So because we don't want them to become married." So the Gemara says, no, because it's money that there's no specific person who has standing to claim it. And so therefore, since there's no specific person who has standing to claim it, we have nothing to do but say that there should be no payment, because you could always push it off to somebody else. There's no specific poor person to claim it. And that's today's Daf Yomi. Obviously, there's so many things on it, but to me, one of the main powerful messages, you should always rush to do the mitzvah, because of one night, therefore she had 4 generations. Imagine, we should always rush to do a mitzvah. If anybody has any questions, I'm happy to address it.